the thrust of our effort is activating the parts of people's brains that do empathy really well. That's what y'all are doing on Multiamory. That's what the folks at Normalizing Non-monogamy are doing. That's what Dan Savage is doing. That's what we're doing at Bonobo Network. There's just like we are trying to get people to hear our stories, to witness our lives, and to potentially see a bit of themselves in those stories, right? That is why this work cannot simply be political. That's why it has to be cultural. That's why it has to be grounded in people coming out and telling their stories.
Welcome to the Multiamory podcast. I'm Jase.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Dedeker.
We believe in looking to the future of relationships, not maintaining the status quo of the past.
So whether you're monogamous, polyamorous, swinging, casually dating, or if you just do relationships differently, we see you and we're here for you.
On this episode of the Multiamory podcast, we are talking to William Winters, who is on the board of directors for OPEN, which stands for Organization for Polyamory and Ethical Non-monogamy. He's a seasoned digital campaign strategist for progressive organizations and causes. William's also a leader in the Bay Area polyamorous and sex-positive communities. He's the founder of Bonobo Network, a sex-positive, consent-focused, power-aware community. And he's also the founder of Express Yourself, a quarterly gathering uniting people of color in celebrations of the erotic. He's been featured in the New York Times and the San Francisco Chronicle, and now the pinnacle of his career, the Multiamory podcast. William, thank you so much for joining us today.
It is indeed an honor.
So you're here. You do a lot of different things, as people can tell from your intro, but you're here on the show today representing the nonprofit OPEN. So I don't think a lot of our listeners have heard of OPEN yet. So can you just tell us about the organization?
Yeah, so OPEN is the Organization for Polyamory and Ethical Non-monogamy. And we're dedicated to normalizing and empowering non-monogamous individuals and communities. We're basically trying to create a movement of the ethically non-monogamous so that we can fight for our very real interests. It's not just about dating. It's also about raising families, and it's about having access to housing and healthcare and other areas where, folks who are ethically non-monogamous are subject to discrimination. And so, we're working to create a world where we're protected from discrimination and where we're improving perceptions, in some cases, creating perceptions of what ethically non-monogamous people look like and how we live.
Yeah, and this is something we've talked about a little on past episodes about kind of the legal status of non-monogamy and how unlike, and this surprises some people, but unlike being queer or, your race or your religion, which are all protected under various, employment discrimination acts, that being polyamorous or otherwise ethically non-monogamous is not protected. It's not a protected status. And so theoretically, you could, say, for example, lose your job or have a child taken away or something like that. So those are kind of the things that you're focusing on in terms of those protections, or are there others I'm missing, or what do you know? You probably know more than I do about that.
Yeah, so a couple things. First off, very often folks who are queer can be discriminated against in all kinds of ways. And, the fight for full employment protection and legal protection is ongoing. But in the realm of ethical non-monogamy, I mean, we see the same like sort of realms of discrimination happening. You know, there's the sort of de jure, like legal discrimination that happens, where people are sometimes denied access to housing if you have multiple partners, you know, or you know, people in some cases are disadvantaged in child custody proceedings. People, in some cases, lose access to job opportunities. And so, you know, lots of folks who are non-monogamous are kind of forced into a closet of sorts because, like, we just don't know when someone will feel threatened or offended by the ways that we love and the kinds of connections that we make and the ways that we live our lives. And so that can have real impacts on our material well-being. But then there's also the kind of social disapprobation or disapproval that comes right along with misperceptions and preconceived notions about people who practice non-monogamy. And so there's this entire other raft of impacts that can sometimes happen where, you know, suddenly, you know, someone finds out, someone at school finds out that, you know, you practice non-monogamy and suddenly your kids lose play dates and, you know,
Right.
find themselves being like teased and ostracized. And perhaps you as a parent find yourself ostracized from your previous social circles and support networks with other parents, right? So there's this like level of social disapprobation as well. And our work in Open is trying to address all of it. We're trying to build real political power so that we can fight and eliminate and create protections against the kinds of legal discrimination that can sometimes happen. And then we are also trying to change how the world perceives ethical non-monogamy by advancing cultural acceptance and representation. And we're in the very early stages of that work. We stand on the shoulders of giants and are, you know, aiming to build relationships with the many folks who have come before us. But, you know, we do think that now is the time for us to like take polyamory and ethical non-monogamy like really seriously as a political identity.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot of, like, as you said, there's a lot of different moving pieces to this when we're thinking about like actually trying to gain momentum and push the ball forward, as it were. And I'm intrigued specifically by the perception piece that you talked about. It brought up a memory for me several years ago. This is probably close to the beginning of this podcast, so probably like 2014, maybe 2015 or so, that I remember on my social media posting about, like, there had been a recent relatively publicized case of someone losing child custody because of the fact that they were in, I forget if it was in a non-monogamous relationship or some kind of like consensually kinky relationship or something like that. And I remember posting about the need for protections and how there's discrimination, and being really surprised by people's perceptions that a lot of people, I would say my so-called maybe more mainstream cishet friends, commenting to say, oh, like, really? This is something that needs to be protected? Like this is just people in their bedrooms, like whatever, people can do whatever. Like, surely this isn't actually something we need to put our energy into. And of course, at the time, being, you know, disappointed, a little bit crestfallen to get that sort of response. And I do think that that response is starting to change, but I do think that like a lot of people still have that perception, right? Of like, why do we need to take this seriously? So I'm curious to hear a little bit more about how we change that, especially on this kind of grander level.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think your friend's perceptions are understandable. You know,
they're not my friends.
Oh, okay.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Wow.
So I think I'm probably just a little bit older than y'all are. But you know, I remember that, like, and so I grew up in Louisiana, and there were still laws criminalizing sodomy on the books that were, you know, enforced in states across the nation, primarily in the South, into the early 2000s. I think it was maybe 2000 or 2001 when the Supreme Court decided to strike those laws down. So for many folks, you know, who think of themselves as like political people, perhaps like your political understanding, was born in a world where it seemed like these things were just kind of like in place, you know, like, of course, like, why do we have to protect people from what's happening in their bedrooms? Like, isn't that protected? And the answer is absolutely not. You know, people are still able to be discriminated against for like activity that you don't agree with, you know. So you can choose not to hire someone because, you know, they're a member of the Proud Boys, or because you know, they're kinky, or because whatever. I mean, it's like generally speaking. And I think that the reality is that, you know, we don't tend to think about our like many people don't tend to think about our bedroom activities as part of our identity, when the fact is, for many of us, like, if you take away the ability to freely practice, you know, what is most intimate and satisfying and fulfilling about, like, our sexuality, our sexual pleasure, then, like, that's really dehumanizing. That like what happens in our private lives are or is vulnerable, and we have a Supreme Court right now that is really bent on keeping it that way, with their focus on like religious liberty. Like, they actually want to enshrine the ability to discriminate against people for practices that, you know, like your religion or your particular interpretation of your religion finds immoral.
I want to kind of continue along those lines a little bit and go back to something that you said earlier about sort of the granular level of how we're going to sort of make these things happen. And you talked about policy change, and I think like even electing people and politicians who kind of go along with the cause and also will potentially put protections in place. And I guess as someone who is feeling very crestfallen and downtrodden at this particular political moment, like, how does one do that, I guess? What are the things that we can do to get people in place in these higher power situations where we're able to pass legislation that is protective of rights and of, you know, polyamory and families and all of those things? Is that something that you all talk about and think about?
You were asking just for like the tiniest shred of hope in this moment of darkness, William.
Yeah, because I think it is big. I mean, it encompasses right now so much. And I mean, my goodness, I think so many people are feeling so dejected right now. And this is an additional facet of that, you know, and another thing that feels as though it can be taken away, or have us told that it's illegal or something, you know, who knows? So, yeah.
Yeah. So one of our board members, Brian DeBlanc, and Sheila, one of Ryan's partners, they say all the time that if members of the legislature don't know that we exist, like as an interest group, then they're never going to work for us, because there's like, to them, there is no us, right? And so even like having an established political identity with an established political organization that is ready to do things like lobby days, where organizing people to, like do visits to your state representatives and state senators' offices in Sacramento or at the local legislative affairs office, is super important to letting the folks who represent you know that you exist and that you have interests that you want protected, right? And so that's step one, that is one step, I should say. So we're working on a couple of different strategies for this. I mean, one is, we've been working to develop an ethical non-monogamy day of visibility. That project is ongoing. We're hoping to launch it in a few months. But just like bringing people into relationship with their own identity as like political agents, as political actors, is super duper important for where we're at in this moment. It's it's like building the movement. It's like letting people know, like, hey, like this polyamory thing you're doing is not just about dating.
Right.
That actually really clarifies it for me a lot, because I think that, I don't know, I think if someone just told me point blank, like, oh, like you need to make this identity political in some way, personally, I'd be like kind of resistant, because to me, I'm like, I want to live my life. Like I realize that I live in this particular landscape and it's important that there's change. But I think clarifying it in almost like these terms of kind of, this is just how the game is played, right? Like I find that very, very, just clarifying is the word about this idea of like, you need to just be visible. It's like, that's almost like step one of trying to get anything to move forward in this particular system. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
It is step one. I mean, if we continue as ethically non-monogamous people, as sex positive people, as kinky people, to hide in the shadows and to treat our very real interests as something that like being forced to hide is okay. Like if we behave in that way, then we're gonna keep being forced to hide. So we have to start perceiving ourselves and our place in the world very differently. And when I look around the non-monogamous landscape in the Bay Area, which probably has more E&M folks than most places
anywhere else
in the world.
Yeah. Like the three places where we're all from, definitely. Yeah.
What I see is like an increasing number of people living their lives out loud because they don't have to rely on just like their friends, like cishet mononormative like parents for playdates. Like there are so many relationships, and there's also like kind of a background cultural understanding of ethical non-monogamy in many parts of the Bay Area now, thankfully. But it basically means that like we're not as scary and we're not as demonized, and I see families increasingly making decisions about their level of exposure, as in like their level of like outness, that like when I first landed in the Bay Area 14 years ago, parents were still like not making those decisions, and they were like having so many more conversations with their kids, just like in my personal circles about, okay, so like make sure you don't talk about daddy's other girlfriend and that kind of thing. And of course that still happens to a certain extent, but it's just it is not the same.
Yeah, I think we can all definitely comment on that as well, just how much we've seen it change drastically over the last 10 years or so.
Yeah. And so like that cultural work, like the stance of open is that, we can't just do the political work. Like we can't, like the work is not just going out and talking to legislators. Like it's also cultural. It's also about making sure that people understand that folks who practice ethical non-monogamy are like regular parents. They are your neighbors. They are like on the PTA. They may be teachers themselves, right? Yeah, we're like there are lots of us, and our lives look a lot of different ways, but very often they look like yours.
Yeah, what
right?
you're describing kind of makes me, it reminds me of something we talk a lot about on this show, is just kind of bringing a humanity to ethical non-monogamy or to polyamory or being open or kink or whatever, because so many people out there probably aren't exposed to this, and having, as you said, this exposure, it'll make it, for lack of a better word, more normalized. And so people, as you said, won't be as afraid of it. And I love that. I think, yeah, that seems like a great place to start, because so many, I guess, more fringe, quote unquote, fringe communities, even queer communities or whatever, at one point, that was more demonized or scary for people. And now it's normalized very much. And I think, yeah, bringing non-monogamy to the forefront in that way as well will normalize it more.
If we go back to like looking at the movement for gay rights, like and especially the focus on marriage equality of the 2000s, like ethical non-monogamy has long been a part of queer cultures, right? And so much of that was suppressed in the public narrative in favor of like monogamous marriage. And strategically, like I can understand that choice, because like you're trying to like bring this highly marginalized, highly sexualized identity, like from the margins of civic life into the center, right? And into like lots of people's understanding of like what American like civic and family life can look like, So I understand the strategic decisions that were made, and like we have to understand that like that also like has an impact on people for whom like regular monogamy is just like not what they're built for, not what like makes them happy, and so like now it's time to really look at ethical non-monogamy and build some power and bring like that identity towards the center as well.
Yeah, and I think that discussion about strategy is an interesting segue, because this is all stuff that we've talked to people about before. We see a lot of people in the non-monogamous community online talking about lack of any legal protections or wanting to normalize this. And some of us have gone about that in different ways. I mean, we created this podcast in part as an effort to kind of normalize and humanize and kind of say, hey, this isn't something where we all need to use pseudonyms and hide it like it's some secret dirty thing. It's like, no, this is just a normal thing that people do. And so we see people approaching this in different ways, some of which are helpful, some of which are maybe not, of just sort of shouting into the void of social media is not always helpful. Sometimes it is, though. And then I think the same thing when it comes to, lobbying and trying to get attention on things is that for so many of us, we just feel like, I want there to be a change. I have a lot of feelings about wanting there to be a change, but I don't really have the experience or the skills to necessarily know what are the most effective ways to make that change. And so I'm curious if you could talk about that a little bit, kind of however you want to take that question, because you have a lot of experience in organizing campaigns for other sorts of progressive organizations too, and other causes. And I'm just curious, actually being in that world, kind of what have you experienced about what is successful versus not successful? Kind of, I guess, to get back to Emily's question a little too, of like, what can we be doing or supporting your organization to do, or, however that is, to actually make real change?
Sure. So I would just bring the conversation back to open and our theory of change. And we think about things in terms of like theory of change because like that basically defines our strategy. Like, what is our best guess for how we can get from point A to point B? It's like a little of that like kind of linear version of logic, but which like is not everyone's cup of tea, but it really works in like the political world. You can have like just that, but like, being able to be like, okay, like I have like a plan mapped out for linearly, like how we get from point A to point B. I can like constantly test those assumptions. And then if something doesn't work, I can like go back to the drawing board and like make adjustments. That's like really important to be able to do. And so for open, our theory of change involves one, building political power, in part by bringing ethically non-monogamous folks into a collective political identity, and then like expressing that identity in the halls of power, right? Second is changing the perception of ethical non-monogamy so that people understand a little bit more, like people who don't practice ethical non-monogamy understand like broadly what we're about, and that we're human and deserve like, housing and family and protection for our families and employment protections and all those things. And then the third thing is that we want to support building like infrastructure in ethically non-monogamous communities. We want to like help people to like understand like what the options are, and to like form like local organizations that similarly like have capacity to fight for like perception and like build political power locally. Like we understand that this is not a movement that is going to be won by like having one central organization. Like we need open, and we need the Polyamory Legal Advocacy Coalition, and we need the Woodhull Foundation, and we need the National Coalition of Sexual Freedom, and we need Loving More, and we need like just all of the many different national and regional and local organizations and communities that are doing everything from organizing conferences to organizing like local potlucks, that are helping to build like connection and capacity in polyamorous and ethically non-monogamous communities, right? We need Black and Poly, we need like all of these amazing organizations that are doing incredible work. We need the landscape of sex educators and like relationship educators that are growing capacity. We need like all of these people to be helping to like build a sort of understanding of like of this practice, just because it is good for us as people. As like in the monogamous world, there is so much support, some of it good, some of it not, for how to be in relationship with other people who are monogamous, and I feel like it is like all to the good for there to be like similar education and learning and support like built in for folks practicing ethical non-monogamy, and all of that also supports building our movement politically, right? Like it's not like we can't think of it as an either or. So those are like the three elements of our theory of change: the political, the cultural, and the infrastructure. And so I would say that like whatever you as an individual are doing to support those things. So if you are like being out about being ethically non-monogamous is a political act. I'm not saying it is enough. I'm not saying it is all you should do, but being as out as you can with like the closest sort of circles where you can still feel like reasonably safe. And I say reasonably safe because like, yes, push it, like experience some challenge, but like like you should, like, hopefully you're not gonna like lose your job or your housing over your decision to come out, right? But understand that like that is part of the risk for some of us, and so we need to figure out like how can we assess those risks, and how can we like find support in our decisions to come out. But being out is super important to people understanding our stories, and that way, like I'm out to my family. I have been out to my family for probably a decade now, and I remember being just so nervous about coming out. I knew my family loved me. I knew that like they would not like disown me or anything, and yet like it was still just like really, really hard to get over the hump. And then when I finally like told my mother that I was in an open relationship, her response was essentially, well, as long as my babies are happy, I'm happy too. And it was like, not everyone is going to be like rewarded in that way for taking the risk, but understand that like so that's also a possibility. Like it's not just like hate and anger and separation and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a really good reminder, I think, to everyone listening out there. Something you said reminded me, so it is interesting to think about the push for the legalization of gay marriage. And I know it's not an exact parallel to this particular fight, but it does feel like it's kind of the closest proxy that we have to think about building that particular momentum. And this is just armchair analysis. I have no training or background in this whatsoever. But what stands out to me is thinking about how with the queer rights movement, there has to be this point where people who are not queer care, right? And care enough to be vocal about it and to support the people in their life who are fighting for this and things like that. And that's something that's been, I think, at least for me, sort of also starting to creep into what I want for multiamory, what I have wanted for a long time, which is sort of being able to create that space where people who have nothing to do with non-monogamy can still care and can still respect it and cannot be just immediately either threatened by it at the worst or at the best, just kind of ambivalent towards what happens to us or how things affect us. But I am just thinking that it does feel like we have not quite yet reached that tipping point where also all your monogamous friends actually care about non-monogamous rights. Not that that doesn't exist yet, but it does feel like that seems like that's probably part of this as well. Would you agree? Do you have a different take on that?
Yeah, I mean, my take is that humans aren't just one thing. Like we're not just good, we're not just bad. One of the great strengths of humanity as a species is our ability to empathize, to like listen to someone else's story and see ourselves in it, that is like an important aspect of being who we are, and, another really important aspect of being human, something that we're sort of fighting against here, is our ability to like recognize difference, to be like, oh, this person isn't like me, or, I don't like this thing. And so I will like excise it. I will banish it or whatever. Right. Like the thrust of our effort is at like activating the parts of our brains of people's brains that do empathy really well. That's what y'all are doing on Multiamory. That's what the folks at Normalizing Non-monogamy are doing. That's what Dan Savage is doing. That's what we're doing at Bonobo Network. There's just like we are trying to get people. And so we're doing an open, we're trying to get people to hear our stories, to witness our lives, and to potentially like see a bit of themselves in those stories, right? That is why this work cannot simply be political. That's why it has to be cultural. That's why it has to be grounded in people coming out and telling their stories. That's why it has to be grounded in people, taking risks with family members and with other parents in the pickup line at school and in your churches, not just the Unitarian ones, and your synagogues, and not just your Reform ones, and so on. Right? I mean, yeah, it's why this work is so important, and what y'all are doing is so important.
We really appreciate you saying that. And yeah, I think that's in a lot of ways been our mission from the beginning, is just putting ourselves out there in a way that makes it feel more normal and accepting, and, like something that anyone could do or be interested in or want to learn more about. And so I appreciate that comes through to people out there.
I also love that emphasis on supporting other groups doing the same stuff too. It's not like, our impact isn't better if we're the only podcast people listen to. We're like, no, let's have people from other podcasts on. We want to promote you too. We want people listening to all of us.
Absolutely.
I love that idea of, for you as an organization at Open, really focusing on, no, we want to help foster all these other ones. It's not like we're trying to be the monopoly on how to push this forward. And the same for whatever you're doing, listener out there at home, of, it's that doing that and then also finding ways to make it easier for other people to do that too. Kind of this sense of let's build each other up and not feel like we're in competition with each other or we need to tear each other down, even if we're doing it a little bit different from how we are.
Yeah.
Exactly. In the Bay Area, where I do most of my work with Bonobo Network, we say all the time that we're about cooperation, not competition. Like even in some place like the Bay Area where there are lots of, poly folks and organizations and so on, like there still like are not so many of us that we can afford to, take a stance of competition against one another. Like the ecosystem is stronger when there are many different access points to this world, many different takes on similar sets of values and similar practices that maybe appeal just a little bit more, than the way we present it. And that's our approach in this political world as well.
I just want to invite our listeners to use your little rewind 15 seconds button and just listen to that quote 600 times.
I was going to say, wouldn't it be nice if our whole world operated in that way, that it's all about, collaboration and not competition? That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think we'd be much better off in many ways.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Hey folks, we're going to take a quick break from our conversation to talk about this week's sponsors. Our sponsors are really instrumental in helping us to keep this show going. So please take a moment, listen, and help us keep doing what we're doing.
I did want to pivot to this open letter that Open recently submitted to Facebook, confronting them on the fact that users aren't able to indicate multiple romantic partners. And is it still a thing that it says, in a relationship or whatever? And so, you essentially can't do that with multiple people. And can you talk a little bit about the strategy there? And also, I'm interested in the fact that New York Times picked this up and, did a whole thing on it, and how cool that is and how you were able to get that publicity.
Yeah. I mean, this campaign is a part of the cultural work that we're doing, right? Again, so something like 20 million people in the US, something like 5% of the total population, have some experience with ethical non-monogamy, right? It's a huge number. Maybe it's 16 million people. I think that might be more accurate. So, but still, that's a really huge number of people. Facebook already recognizes them somewhat in having the open relationship option.
Yeah,
right?
and that's weird that I feel like that's like a legacy option, isn't it? Hasn't it been around from
since the beginning? Yeah.
Which is so odd.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and my young self and my friends would put that on there, I'm in an open relationship with my friend Rebecca or whatever.
Oh, would you really?
Yeah. Yes, that was the cool thing to do.
Oh, funny.
And so we know that Facebook has the capacity to do this. I mean, people can name, for instance, different family members. You can name your, 15 first cousins, and, you can name all your siblings individually. You can name these relationships via Facebook. I can designate that Eugene Winters is my brother, Karen Winters is my sister, or that William Winters is my father, right? I can name all of these things. So
I have stepdads and multiple stepdads and a dad and mom and stepmoms.
Oh, wow.
You can list all those on your profile. Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't even think about that.
Facebook already acknowledges polyamory. Amazing.
There you go.
In a way, yeah.
I mean, so exactly. I mean, you can name all of these close family relationships. So it just seems odd. Facebook isn't living up to its own purported mission of creating a more connected world, when we who practice ethical non-monogamy are not able to name the partnerships and loverships and other, relational titles and roles that make up our family constellations. Right. And so we're just calling on Facebook to, live up to its own creed. and I don't think it's like particularly controversial, but the impact of being able to, like, once again, like, allow people to be out about who they're connected with, and not just leave it to the imagination or have people like assume that it's a joke, as you said you were doing earlier in your youth. Like that really matters. It makes it real. It makes it more real for my family when they get to like actually meet or see the other people I'm partnered with. That concretization is big.
Especially when it's billions of people that use Facebook on a daily basis. That's an option, a potential option. That's huge publicity, I think, and also huge, I guess, this sphere. Like you can see that actually in writing on there. That's really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we think that this is going to be a really important campaign area more generally, like not just Facebook, but like, what are the other opportunities to advance the cultural narrative about ethical non-monogamy, to create like more acceptance through non-governmental means? So in changing the political landscape, we're going to want to see, I think that politicians and the courts, if it gets down to the courts, although as we've seen, relying on the courts for big policy change is like not necessarily the best option. Mm-hmm. But womp womp. But yeah, I mean, like policymakers are going to want to see that like there is already movement towards this acceptance. Like most legislators don't want to be at the vanguard of something.
Yeah, they want to follow.
They want to follow. Exactly. Yeah, they are very cautious, and that requires that. I mean, like a sort of liberatory, a liberatory approach to democracy demands that we, as the governed, are leading. I mean, that's always the way it's been. And so we have to create the conditions that demonstrate that there is already significant movement. So that means that we're going to have to ask major corporations to have non-discrimination policies against, ethical non-monogamy. And we're going to have to, have corporations provide benefits to like multiple partners and that kind of thing, right? Like the groundwork has to be laid through other means in order to like achieve the ultimate political ends that we want. And so we think that like this campaign against Facebook is just like the first step in a much bigger strategy to create a landscape of acceptance in American life, and at points that are like much more susceptible to this kind of like public pressure. It's much easier to change like a corporation's HR policy or to like pass an ordinance at the local level, particularly in like more progressive cities, than it is to pass a bill through the California state legislature or through Congress, right? And so we're clear. Yeah, I mean, can't pass much through Congress these days.
Apparently not.
Yeah, exactly. And so that is a broad look at the strategy and where the role of campaigns like this Facebook campaign fit in.
I think that's a great example too of how they're all connected like that. How this kind of visibility and normalizing of something and then getting change at these small levels then trickles up to the larger levels, and how it's all kind of connected to each other. I also just as a quick side note, as someone who works in the IT space, the fact that you also kind of identified, oh, look, Facebook already has this mechanism in place in other areas, so it should be relatively easy. And nothing's ever as easy in software as people think it should be, but it's relatively easy for them to be able to pull that off. And this is just something that I'm seeing come up more and more in conversations about like how we structure the backend database for our, medical information system can be a really hard thing to change. And so if we've set it up in one way, we can end up kind of locked into it. When it comes to like things like gender, for example, or, sexual preference or something like that, sexuality, that if your database was built a certain way, that can actually be incredibly hard to ever change that just logistically, even if you want to. And so I think that's also worth keeping in mind, that as you get some of these companies that do have the resources or things in place already to do that, that others in building their systems might follow suit and go, you know what, just in case, we should probably build that in to our system as well.
That's great.
So I think it just makes sense kind of all around, and that's really cool. So as we're getting close to the end of this episode, could we take a quick moment for you to tell us a little bit about the Bonobo Network that you started, that you run? What is it? What are you doing with that?
Yeah, sure. So Bonobo Network is a private membership organization that creates community for those of us who recognize that monogamy isn't always the best option for everyone, and that pleasure comes in many different packages. Where in many ways, like you can think of us as a social club. I really like to think of us as a community. We do lots of different kinds of events to do that kind of capacity building and education, and just creating like tightly woven social networks that we talked about as being the third peg of Open's theory of change, right? So we throw parties and we facilitate workshops. We host retreats. We organize potlucks and happy hours and discussion groups and a book club. We do online mixers. We have like an interview series, and so much more. But, in short, we bring people with sex positive values and often non-monogamous leanings together to find real support and learning and connection with others who share values around consent and empathy and accountability and inclusion and interdependence, So that is like the sort of snapshot of Bonobo Network and what we do. I'm the founder. Like the entity that became Bonobo Network began with like my 31st birthday party in 2010. And
wait, sorry, just when you're saying like the entity, I'm thinking of some kind of like spirit realm or some kind of summoned elder god or something. Like, it's creating some really
I just mean LLC.
That entity. The legal entity. Yes.
The legal entity, not the spiritual entity. We're not that kind of organization. So the entity that became Bonobo Network got its start with like my 31st birthday party in 2010. It was just like a small gathering of friends in my 2-bedroom apartment, and has since grown to, thousands of participants across the Bay Area and around the world. We have something like 1,500 active paying members now, and growing.
Nice.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And also, could you talk briefly about Express Yourself as well?
Oh, yeah. So Express Yourself sort of is an extension of the work that I was doing in Bonobo. I think I had like my first conversation with friends about throwing a POC play party in like 2011 or something like that. I think it was November 2011 when that conversation first sort of emerged. And then in 2018, 2017, I partnered with an amazing person, and we actually brought that vision into reality. We created a POC play party in Oakland, and it was incredible. It was just like such a positive, affirming experience, and we did it again with a larger team the next year, and we've since been doing these events quarterly, pandemic notwithstanding, in Oakland. And that event, like Express Yourself, came at a time when there was a lot of really cool stuff happening in the PSE organizing landscape, like sex positive organizing landscape in the Bay Area. So now there's Express Yourself as a regular event. There's Soul, which is Mission Control's version of a POC party. There is Black Kink Bay Area. There's Kinky, Colorful, and Conscious, which is like a discussion series. There's for folks of color. There's just like a lot of like capacity in the Bay Area POC sex positive community, which is just really important, because I think that sometimes these spaces and like the practice of like ethical non-monogamy and like the sort of practice of like sex positive values and culture can look really white and look really like exclusive and hard to approach for folks of color. And so creating these spaces where we can like come together, and I guess your viewers can't see me, I'm a Black man, where we can like build that capacity with one another, has just been a magical experience that is good for like the folks of color in this community, and is also like good for the community at large. So really happy to be doing that work, and definitely looking forward to the next Express Yourself event in early August.
Nice.
Yeah.
This has been a really excellent conversation, William. We really appreciate having you on the show, and I hope that we can continue hearing about what is going on with Open and helping in any way that we can. And also for our listeners, where can we find more of you and your work? And then also, where can people follow Open?
Yeah, for sure. So, like I said, most of my day-to-day work is with Bonobo Network. And so you can find us at bonobonetwork.com. If you like what you see, if our values and vibes sort of align with what you're looking for in a community, you can click the apply button and complete our membership application and join us. You can also find Bonobo Network on Facebook and Instagram and even Twitter, though we don't say very much there. You can also find me at Open. That's open-love.org. That's open-love.org. And you can find out about Open. You can join our email list. You can donate. That's another really important piece of the puzzle. Organizations, as it turns out, need capital to survive. We have an amazing executive director, an amazing political director, and political staff deserve salaries that they can like live on, as it turns out. So you can join our email list. You can donate. You can plug into the various efforts that I've mentioned on this program there.
Excellent. Thank you. And yeah, listeners, definitely go check out all of those resources, and you can find out even more about how to support this mission. And for those of you that are following us on Instagram, on our Instagram stories this week, we're going to be asking you, What sort of political and cultural change do you want to see regarding consensual non-monogamy? And be specific. Don't just say, oh, I want things to change and be better. We really want to hear your specific thoughts, your specific ideas, your specific visions of a more accepting future and what that looks like to you. Also, the best place to share your thoughts about this episode with other listeners is in our episode discussion channel in our Discord server. You can also post about it in our private Facebook group. You can get access to these groups and you can join our exclusive community by going to patreon.com/multiamory. In addition, you can share with us publicly on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Multiamory is created and produced by Jase Lindgren, Emily Matlack, and me, Dedeker Winston. Our episodes are edited by Mauricio Balvanera. Our production assistants are Rachel Shennework and Carson Collins. Our theme song is Forms I Know I Did by Josh and Anand from the Fractal Cave EP. The full transcript is available on this episode's page on multiamory.com.